Dolly Parton wrote one of the greatest goodbye songs of all time. And as we talk about goodbye songs of all time, also just taking a moment to just, she's a legend and her passing away is really a hit for the culture. And I want to talk about her impact in music, outside of music, but more specifically, what she taught us about careers and about our monies and about our lives. So, like I said, she wrote one of the greatest goodbye songs of all time. And a lot of us, when we hear it, we think it's romantic, but it was not romantic at all. It was actually for a professional breakup. And I cannot stop thinking about that because before Dolly became the Dolly Parton that we all know, she had a career defining partnership with Porter Wagner. And this was a television show that helped introduce her to a much larger audience. They performed together, they built something great together, and that partnership was important for her to becoming the star that we know her to be. But eventually, Dolly knew she needed to leave. She was just kind of like, all right, like, I gotta go. And I don't know all the specifics of it, but it just wasn't working for her. And it just didn't seem like he had her best interests at heart. Right. So the separation wasn't necessarily easy. And, you know, they eventually worked out whatever the suing, the mess of it all when you're kind of departing and separating, or what is it called? Um, this is a word when people remove themselves from each other. Decoupling. They were decoupling. Um, but during that separation, Dolly wrote, "I will always love you." Again, it's not about a romantic breakup. It's about the end of a professional partnership. And let me just find the lyrics. So the lyrics were if I should stay, I would only be in your way, so I'll go. But I know I'll think of you each step of the way. And I will always love you. Right? Like we know that. We know that deep in our hearts, I will always love you. Not only do we know it deep in our hearts because the song is so iconic, we know it deep in our hearts because we've probably had a similar situation of walking away. She also says, bittersweet memories. That's all I'm taking with me. Goodbye. Please don't cry. We both know I'm not what you need. Now, obviously, this is like iconic breakup stuff. Like, we've all probably been in a relationship where we may have felt that we're not what the person needs and it was time to go away. But, like, also at work, this is also very true at work. We might have outgrown our role, the company, whatever. And whether they're letting us go or whether we're moving away, that still holds true. And I want to talk about that today because layoffs, rifts, all this turmoil in the economy, what did Dolly teach us about it? Right. Because the song doesn't pretend that nothing valuable happened simply because the relationship had to end. Like, she doesn't talk about that. Like, she actually writes, "I will always love you," because she's like, yo, I understand the impact you had on my career. In essence, she says, I need to go. And I know that. But I also know that part of who I have become is connected to what we built together. And therefore, I will always be grateful for that. And I'm going to use the word grateful here because, unlike Dolly, I am not going to sing I will always love you to every company that ever employed me. Okay? Because let us not get carried away. Let us be fucking real right now. Okay? Like, I am grateful for a lot of the experiences like I learned despite the layoffs, despite the whatever, but I will not love you, okay? But essentially, I understand the sentiment because one of the hardest things about leaving a job, whether you resign, whether you get laid off, you survive an acquisition, or simply realize that this is done and it's time, is that we need to make the story good or bad. We like to live in these extremes. This job was great and I can't believe they let me go. This job was horrible, right? But no, it's actually, even when things end, and even if it ends in a hurtful way, there are learnings in all of it. The experience helped us. We sometimes convince ourselves that um we have to create these narratives. But Dolly's story gives us another option. Dolly's like, nah, it's okay. You can be grateful for the apprenticeship, the learning, the salary that you got, and still know when the partnership needs to end, when the job needs to end, right? And we know that even if the job ends for whatever reason, our knowledge stays with us. Like this is not going anywhere. It's with us. And I learned that through my own layoffs. For the first layoff I had, well, I wouldn't say actually it's the second, because the first layoff I had, I was actually 16. It was my first job. But I talk about that in another video, but this, I'm going to talk about my more professional grown adult bills layoff. And I got that job. I had successfully pivoted from working in government to working in tech. I was the third person hired at this tech startup. And because it was a startup, I did not fit into a neat little box. Like I had a job title, but there was so much more to what I could and was supposed to do. I came in as a partnership executive. My job was to contact nonprofits, colleges, and organizations that helped young people get employment, get sustainable employment. And I had to learn to write code emails. I had to get someone on the phone. I had to explain um, an unfamiliar program, unfamiliar thing to people so I can get them on board so they can actually give me the candidates so I can do my job. And I had to handle objections and sell really well. I had to learn that. Then I did that well enough that to create we needed to solve another problem that was created. Which honestly is how most jobs work. And a quick tangent here, this is why when people are saying like AI is going to ruin everything, will AI drastically change the way we work? Yes. However, AI is going to solve some problems and create new problems. So really the goal here is understanding what problems do I need to solve today and how can I use AI to solve that? And then once I do that, now I am well versed enough in this ecosystem to be ready for the next jobs that are available. It's a continuing thing. So essentially, for this startup that I was at, I came in, my job was partnerships. My job was to find candidates so they can get these jobs. I did that. Then once I got the candidates, I had to figure out something next, right? Because the candidates I had were diverse and they came from all different forms of background and knowledge, and we had to move them through the hiring process and actually secure them jobs because the sales team at my company was finding people who wanted to hire them. But even though I had found the candidates, there was still a gap where it was like, okay, we have people who want to hire you, we have people who want jobs, but how do we help them talk to each other so we're successful in the candidate getting a job and the employee getting, sorry, the employer getting an employee, right? So I moved over to candidate support. I created frameworks, methodologies, and courses, and candidates began getting interviews, and they were doing really really well. But we still saw a bit of a gap in some of the companies not feeling comfortable hiring them. So then a new solution had to be made. So I moved over from candidate support to client support, where I was helping the clients think through how do you hire in a way that reduces bias, right? How do we make sure that the way that you're thinking about your hiring practices are not excluding people just because they don't have the fancy degree that you're used to having, right? Because people still have very real talent, even if they don't have, an Ivy League degree attached to them. So our clients were accustomed to hiring people in this caliber. And I had to say, hey, there are other ways that we can assess potential. There are other ways we can assess work ethic. There are other ways we can assess learning aptitude that do not require a random piece of paper, right? So that became like my third job. But also in between, I did so much. So I started out as partnerships and I did candidate development, curriculum design, client education, sales, marketing, UX and UI, right? All these became part of my roles over time. And all that random, like operational work that appears when you join a startup, like early enough that you just become part of the infrastructure. That was all that I was learning, right? So I may have entered as one title, but the company became an apprenticeship in at least five different professions. And I worked really hard. And because I worked really hard, my metrics appeared in pitches. My results appeared in updates that went to the board. My ideas helped the company tell the story of its progress, of its success. However, and you might have felt this too, however, my promotion continued to lag behind my contribution. I was good enough for the board, but not quite enough for the promotion. Right. And this is why I want to bring Dolly back into the conversation because let me find the lyrics because Dolly says, tumble out of bed and I stumble to the kitchen. Pour myself a cup of ambition. Why am I rapping this? Who knows? um, and yawn and stretch and try to come to life. Jump in the shower and the blood starts pumping. Out on the street, the traffic starts jumping. With folks like me on the job from 9 to 5. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. Barely getting by, it's all taken and no giving. They just use your mind and they never give you credit. What did I just say? Use my mind, but never give me credit. Never give me the promotion. Okay. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it. 9 to 5 for service and devotion. You would think that I would deserve a fair promotion. Okay. Want to move ahead, but the boss won't seem to let me. I swear, sometimes that man is out to get me. Then she goes to verse 2. Then she says, they let you dream just to watch them shatter. You're just a step on the boss man's ladder. But you've got dreams he'll never take away. In the same boat with a lot of your friends, waiting for the day your ship will come and the tide's gonna turn and it's gonna roll your way. Right. Now, as I even say that, I'm thinking about Beyonce because Beyonce also talks about, like getting out of that job. But we'll talk about Beyonce later. But I say this to say it's like exactly how I felt. And Dolly like talks about it. Dolly was part of that voicing of this real thing that a lot of us are facing, right? And in this current space that we're in, I want to talk a little bit later about Dolly and how she showed us how to take our knowledge with us and become wealthy and become independent with it. But in this case, with this startup, they took my ideas, but they did not give me a promotion. And when the time came for a layoff, they laid me off with about 40 or so percent of the company, right? We usually had all hands meeting. Let's say the all hands was usually on a Wednesday. They moved it to a Thursday, and when they had the all hands, it was silent. There was no music playing like it usually is. The chat was off. You couldn't see anything, which was already weird. But what was weird, it was the day before my manager, who was a stickler about being in office, was like, "Oh, you don't have to come to the office." So they knew shady. You see what Dolly said about um the boss man. I swear sometimes that man is out to get me. It really felt like that. Okay. That song resonates deep, 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 deep. Because what are you talking about? Okay. But anyway, strange behavior in corporate sometimes. Okay. And I think about that because I did my work and I was good at my work, but I didn't get the promotion. But then we had someone else, another woman who did her work and did get the promotions, but then she was also laid off with me. And I know for a fact that she was a darling of the company. And she gave that company everything. So I thought to myself, if loyalty and excellent work could make anybody safe, she surely would have been the safe person, and she wasn't. So seeing her name helped something click for me. This was like, this was not a judgment on my worth. It was a numbers decision made by business. A company can value your output and still eliminate your role, right? It's nothing for them. Your work can be good enough for the board and your employment can still end. Both things can be true. But here's what's also true. They could end my employment, but they cannot unteach me the things I learned, right? They could not take my ability to sell. They could not take the framework I now know how to build. They could not take my ability to identify the next problem hiding behind the one we had just solved. They cannot take back the versatility I developed by moving through all these different functions. So the job might have ended, but the knowledge stayed. And this is why I deeply believe that every job is an apprenticeship and why I really admire Dolly because I think she highlights it. And I want to talk about that in a second because but back to the layoff, you are being paid when you are in any job. Yes. You're also producing value for that organization. That is also true. But you should also be learning how decisions get made, how customers behave, how systems break, how power operates and how you create results. But most importantly, you need to learn your craft so well that wherever you go, you are there. Your craft is there with you. The company keeps the deliverables, right? But you keep the person you became in that process, which I keep saying back to Dolly. So let's get back to Dolly. Dolly did not just leave a partnership. When she wrote I Will Always Love You, she wrote a beautiful song about it, but she also understood ownership. She understood that, hey, I am bringing so much value here. And even though we might be bringing value to each other in this moment, I'm also the person who knows my craft well enough to leave this space and grow more. So we see throughout her career that Dolly wrote most of her hits and she retained the rights of all her songs. And that matters a lot. Retaining your own intellectual property, learning for yourself throughout every job, because these jobs will do whatever they want. They really will. So it's like, how do you bring your own self to this situation? Now, how do you also protect yourself? And we see that Dolly protected herself because she wore these elaborate costumes, right? The rhinestones that made people look, the big wig, right? She had humor that made people love her, and she had a persona that made her instantly recognizable. And for us in our jobs and in our 9 to 5s, it's really about what are your rhinestones? What is your big wig? Right? What is making people look your way? How are you creating visibility for yourself? And that can look like sharing your wins, sharing your work. It says the humor that made people love her, that was so core. What is the thing that make people love you? Is it that you're easy to work with, you're understandable, you bring calm to every situation? What is that about you? And then we also noticed that her persona made her instantly recognizable. If you hear Dolly's voice, you might not listen to her music all the time or whatever the case might be, but if you hear her voice, like you kind of understand, you know who's talking. And we can say that for so many people: Obama, Beyonce, Oprah. Like you hear the voice, and you know what's happening. Right. But also in all of this, we respected and we looked for all those things because we deeply respected her craft and her music. So at the bottom of all of it is like expertise in your own craft, because the costumes were never a substitute for the craft. She began her music while she was still a teenager, right? But also, like, that's when we got to know her, but she was practicing before that. She was learning before that. By the time, like, we met her, the world met her, she was a fully formed character of Dolly Parton, right? She was just fully formed person. And underneath that, there were already years of songwriting, singing, playing, and studying the traditions that she came through, right? There's a lot of church underneath everything that she shares. There's a lot of her Appalachian upbringing that's underneath what she sings about. And that's why she gets to be so specific in her craft. And that's why we relate to her so much. Because who doesn't like sing 9 to 5 and think about their job? Who doesn't think about I will always love you and think about all the different situations and relationships that may or may not have worked out, but you're still grateful for them because they taught you something about yourself? So essentially the costume like caught our attention, but the craft held it. And her roots gave her the craft and something to say. And we all have that. We all have our craft, but we need to like pour into that craft. We all have our own roots and experiences, and we need to be comfortable enough to share it. Right? Dolly grew up in extreme poverty in Appalachia. She eventually entered rooms far wealthier and more glamorous than the place that where she began. But she did not treat where she came from as an embarrassing first draft. It was who she was. She kept returning to working people, poor families, complicated women, and quite frankly, the dignity of the lives of the other people might overlook. And that is why we related to her, because we were like, we see you, we hear you, we understand this is coming from a real place. Because 9 to 5 was not a simple, catchy song, right? It actually came from a concept of a whole album that was supposed to like highlight odd jobs. It was like 9 to 5 odd jobs. And it was supposed to talk about working life, about coal miners, farm workers, working mothers, people who are the bedrock of our society in so many ways, right? So when I think about job functions and how we show up, like show up for ourselves, show up in our truth. right? Because when we show up like Dolly, she learned how to manipulate the stage and the spotlight without surrendering the person who walked into it. She used to say like people used to call her like a dumb blonde, I guess, and she would be like, "Well, I know I'm not a blonde," because she was actually it was a wig, and she goes, "So, and I also know I'm not dumb, right? Like you know who you are. You might present something to the world, but your craft and who you are stays." She knew the difference between being like visible and ownership. And that lesson is quite frankly for all of us because most of us are not like necessarily negotiating publishing rights for a song that Whitney Houston or Beyonce may one day turn into a global phenomenon, but we still need to ask, what do I get to keep? You may not own the presentation you created for your employer, but you can keep a private record of the results it produced. But also, you know how you created that thing. Your employer, your boss just read the end result, but you know the process to get there. And if you know the process to get there, you can do it again wherever you go, right? You may not own the company's methodology, but you retain the judgment you developed by applying it. And again, you may not be able to take the clients list with you, but you keep what you learned about building trust, about managing objections, and about solving problems. Because maybe you don't even want that client list because who child, they stressed you. But you know how to navigate that stress. So you may leave the title behind, but you should be able to name the capabilities hiding underneath it. Because we are more than our titles. We are the parts. We are the things that make that title. And that title only becomes a thing because of who we are. You understand? So we keep the knowledge, we keep the receipts, we keep the relationships that are genuinely ours. We keep a clear understanding of what happens because we were there, because we were in the room. We keep enough of our identity that an employer cannot reorg, lay off it away because we are we. You understand? So I'm thinking about that now because I don't know where, life will lead us. The economy is so weird. But I do know that I like Dolly, I have my music rights. I have my knowledge rights. Wherever I go, wherever I land, I have that. I've trained people around the world. I've watched leaders and individual contributors interpret the same organizational change completely different. And I've learned to navigate that and get results. I've learned that implementing software sometimes requires you to be part trainer, part translator, part mediator. And the best part is like part therapist. And the funny thing about my career is that I started out as a therapist. I started out as a social worker, a licensed social worker. You understand? So what this teaches me over and over again is that who you are. Dolly was who Dolly was over her expansive career. She was putting out songs since the 1960s. She passed away in 2026 and she's still iconic. So whatever happens to the job, I know you know more than you did when you entered. The company can decide whether the apprenticeship mattered, right? The company can decide whether they love your deliverables or not, but you have the process to get there. You get to decide what you carry forward. And I think that's the real lesson I'm taking away from Dolly. Find out who you are and do it on purpose. That's what she told us several times. Several times she told us, find out who you are and do it on purpose. Learn the stage, build the persona, master your craft, keep your roots. And when it's time to leave, when it is time to leave, leave. But do not leave empty-handed. Who said it? Denzel said it best. I'm leaving here with something. Okay? And we must all leave wherever we're leaving with something. You do not have to pretend the experience was perfect. You do not have to deny the hurt, the rejection that comes with some of these company decisions. You do not have to offer a lifelong loyalty to prove that you are grateful. But you can say, this chapter taught me, this chapter changed me, this chapter is over. Because the knowledge stays with you even when the job ends. So I want you to think about your current job or your previous jobs that you're still trying to recover from. What did it teach you that nobody can take back ever? Right? Tell me in the comments. What are you keeping?